Hello?
Ha.
Am I audible and visible?
Yes. 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 Both.
Okay. Shall we begin? Oh, or we are late? Okay. Okay, we'll begin on time. We have 1 minute left. I'm just waiting for that. Yes. We have approximate 58 participants with us. Okay, let's begin. It's 3 already. Shall I?
Yes, you can. I think it's
Mm,
three.
yes. Okay, now am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to this webinar titled Towards Neo-Normal, Pandemic and Migration in Literary Context, organized by Department of English, Syamsundar College, in collaboration with Department of English, Sarat Centenary College. With very few words, I would like to introduce you all with our institution and today's webinar as well. Late Rai Bahadur Bishalakho Bose, the esteemed social worker of the village Syamsundar, established Syamsundar College on August 1948, presently affiliated to the University of Burdwan with different undergraduate and postgraduate departments. This institution was accredited B+ by NAC. All the stakeholders related to the college contribute to serve its motto, which is Ya Vidya Sha Vimuktaya. Learning leads to emancipation. Today's webinar is to give opportunity to try and understand the issue of literature, culture, and health crisis in relation to our present pandemic experiences. Our aim is to facilitate exploration and engagement of the interdisciplinary space between literature, social sciences, and health. We firmly believe that today's lectures by our eminent speakers, Dr. Sabyasachi Chattopadhyay, Associate Professor, Department of History, Kalyani University, and Dr. Anway Mukhopadhyay, Assistant Professor, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Kharagpur, will help us to engage with new aspects of socio-cultural conditions and human life at large. We can anticipate constructive outcomes and look forward to potential new ideas and research possibilities. Finally, we expect our participants to support the spirit of this webinar and convey their queries and views during the technical session. Now, I would like to request Dr. Ramanuj Konar, Head of the Department of English, Sarat Centenary College, to say a few words. Thank you. Over to Ramanuj, sir.
Thank you, Supriti, and a very good afternoon to you all. On behalf of Sarat Centenary College, the collaborating institute for this webinar, I would like to thank the organizing institute for organizing this webinar. I also take this opportunity to convey the message of Dr. Sandeep Kumar Basak, our principal, who has wished all success of this event and hopes that this collaboration will continue in future also through academic exchanges between the two institutions. The two distinguished resource persons for our event today, dear Dr. Chattopadhyay and dear Dr. Mukhopadhyay, please accept our heartiest greetings. Both of you have been so nice to cooperate with us whenever we call you up to make some adjustments, whatever about the date or time of the event. You have always accommodated our requests. Thank you so much for this. I'm really looking forward to your lectures. Thank you all. Over to Supriti.
Thank you, Dr. Konar. Now, Principal Syamsundar College, Dr. Gaurashankar Bandhopadhyay, without whose encouragement and constant support this webinar would not have been a possibility, will be addressing the welcome note. With his excellent academic career, having approximately 15 books, more than 60 research articles, and experience in various national and international academic institutions, including Cambridge and Oxford University, Principal Sir will be discussing the focal points of today's webinar. So, Principal Sir, it's over to you now. Do unmute yourself and please deliver the welcome note.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes.
Welcome to today's webinar on pandemic and migration in literary context and new normal order, organized by Department of English, Syamsundar College, in association with the Department of English, Sarat Centenary College. Thank you all, especially our two distinguished resource persons, Professor Sabyasachi Chattopadhyay, Department of History, Kalyani University, and Dr. Anway Mukhopadhyay, Department of English, IIT Kharagpur, for taking out time being with us here today. I am Gaurashankar Bandhopadhyay, Principal of Syamsundar College and patron of the today's webinar. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all reputable online participants of this digitized program. My colleagues, particularly teachers from the Department of English, have provided huge labor to arrange this event in current critical hours of ongoing pandemic. However, we would love to hear from our learned speakers today. Our students are also ready to get enriched. Now, I would like to take this opportunity to express my observation of the focal theme of the webinar. It's better to furnish a title of my deliberation, Pandemic-Induced Migration in Literature through the Civilizations. Indeed, There is a long tradition of pandemic and pandemic-induced migration in the history of our human civilization. In ancient world, plague, pox, pestilence were the frequent calamities. When these infectious diseases spread, no medicine could help, and no one could stop it from striking the persons and the contaminated objects. The immense fright was also fueled by a belief in the supernatural origin of pandemic, which were often believed to be provoked offenses against divinities. All these beliefs and attitudes have been reflected in a world literature through the ages. In early Indian Vedic literature, one can find the ways and means to fight against epidemics and pandemics in the Atharva Veda. Charaka Samhita, devoted mainly to Ayurveda or later age, is based on many chapters of Atharva Veda which deal with the cases of epidemics and possible way to fight them. Again, in Buddhist India, a Buddhist sutra mentions the outbreak of epidemic vividly, which devastated ancient Vaishali city of Aryabhatta, North India. Gautama Buddha, living in Rajagriha, expressed his deep concern about that contagion before his disciple Ananda and prescribed quarantine practices to control contamination. Similarly, in the Bible, Exodus, the plague epidemic was viewed as one of God's punishment for sins. The casual relationship between plague like pandemics and sin may be found in ancient Greek literature also, such as Homer's Iliad and Sophocles' Greek tragedy Oedipus the King. In contrast, the Greek historian Thucydides, in his outstanding work, The Peloponnesian War, and Latin poet Lucretius, in his literary work De Rerum Natura, refuted a supernatural origin of the epidemics and focused their attention on the uncontrolled fear of contagion among the common people. Both said that plague did not discriminate between the good and the evil like today's coronavirus. In the Quran and Hadith, the Prophet Muhammad advised the Arabian people to live in containment zone and prohibited any type of migration or movement during pandemics. Amitabh Ghosh, one of the celebrated literary figures of our times, opined recently that epidemics have historically generated a lot of writings. Later medieval writings, popularly known as Renaissance literature, such as Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio and the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, highlighted human behavior relating to pandemics like bubonic plague. The fear of contagion increased vices such as avarice, greed, and corruption, which paradoxically led to infection and thus to both moral and physical death. The Betrothed by Italian novelist Alessandro Manzoni of early modern period reflects an extraordinary description of plague that struck Milan city around 1630. There is a rich repository of pandemic literature in English language which started since late medieval and early modern age. The Last Man by Mary Shelley is maybe considered as the best example which was written about plague epidemic. Then one after another was appeared. Daniel Defoe's classic A Journey of the Plague Year may be mentioned in this context. The most widely circulated literary work on pandemics in English language was The Scarlet Plague, 1912, by US-based writer John Griffith London or Jack London. He made the plague more realistic and even more frightening. It is one of the first examples of a post-apocalyptic fiction novel in modern literature. Another two great literary works of epidemics of modern age are French philosopher writer Albert Camus' The Plague and Love in the Time of Cholera, in Spanish originally in 1985 by Latin American writer Gabriel Garcia Marquez. The necessity of literature in the aftermath of pandemic is surprisingly illustrated in Emily St. John Mandel's novel Station 11. Ed Simon, in the Millions, a notable magazine, observes that pandemic literature exists not just to analyze the reasons for the pestilence, that may not even be its primary purpose. Rather, the telling its story is a reminder that sense still exists somewhere, that if there is not meaning outside of the quarantine zone, there's at least meaning within our invented stories. The next interlinked component is pandemic-induced migration. There is a correlation in between migration and globalization of infectious diseases. There is hardly any doubt that migration could play a role in importing emerging infectious diseases, EID, and could be a sentinel of major epidemics and pandemics as we've seen in the transnational spread of COVID-19 in the present world. It is observed that the drivers of mobility, the process of the international movement, and the back and forth transitioning between differential risk environments has significance for the management of infectious diseases in migrant receiving areas. However, migration is a global phenomenon that influences the health of individuals and populations over their lives. The hard reality is that migrants, in most cases, do not migrate by choice. Unmeasured vulnerability and huge sufferings of the today's migrant workers of India during lockdown as well as unlock phases proved that those hapless workers are bound to migrate from their working places and march towards their native homes. Migrants are considered at higher risk for a range of health hazards, including infectious diseases. The higher risk is partly due to poor socioeconomic conditions and, in some countries, is due to lack of rights to health coverage for undocumented migrants. Amitabh Ghosh, Gun Island, also portrays that how climatic disruption led to migration of people. The following are the now I'm telling the few modern literary works on this topic. No More Books by Felicity Kostevna, The Good Life Elsewhere by Vladimir Lorchenkov, Cockroach by Ravi H, The Shadow Lines by Amitabh Ghosh, and Exist West by Mohsin Hamid, and so on. Lastly, this ongoing global pandemic situation warns us about the curbing of human rights to some extent. History tells us that pandemics have always been used by the state to tighten their grip on the population. Camus also depicted the powerlessness of the individual and high-handedness of the state machinery during epidemic times. Thank you, my learned listeners, for hearing me. Our panic due to ongoing pandemic reminds us that the world is not ours only. Now, be safe, take care of each other, and wear mask and wash your hands. Have a nice time.
Thank you, Principal Sir, for such an edifying lecture where you have traced the journey of pandemic induced migration itself from ancient to recent times in relation to different literature and religion. So, thank you for that once again. Now, I request Dr. Debopriya Banerjee, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Syamsundar College, to prepare for the technical session. So, Debopriya Banerjee, ma'am, it's over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes. Can you just turn on
Okay.
your video?
Yes. Am I audible and visible now?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. So, a very warm good afternoon to everyone who is present here on this virtual platform. I extend my warm greetings to our Honorable Principal, Dr. Gaurishankar Bandyopadhyay, my colleagues from within the college and around the fraternity, and everyone who is listening. And lastly, and most importantly, to our two guest speakers who have given us their time today amongst their very busy schedule to be with us and explore this relation between pandemic, migration, and the value of literature. Our first speaker in this technical session is Dr. Anway Mukhopadhyay. He is currently Assistant Professor in English, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Kharagpur, as Shukriti had already mentioned. And he also, Dr. Mukhopadhyay, thank you very much. We are delighted to have you with us today. He has also taught earlier in he has also taught earlier in University of Bardwan and also Benares Hindu University. What inspires me most, what has inspired me most about Dr. Mukhopadhyay in the past couple of days when we have had a very inspiring and stimulating conversation is his vast array of research interest. He is a prolific writer and a very dedicated research. His most notable publications include, amongst many others, is the book The Goddess in Hindu Tantric Tradition, Devi as Corpse, published by Routledge. He has also written literary and cultural reading of goddess spirituality, The Red Shadow of the Mother, which is published by Cambridge Scholars Publication, and another book on the authority of female speech in Indian goddess tradition is due to be published by Palgrave and Macmillan. He has interestingly also made a documentary on Saraswati, Daughters of Saraswati, which has been screened in Banaras Hindu University Centers for Women's Study. Today, Dr. Mukhopadhyay is also the recipient, a brilliant academic. He is also the recipient of the award given by Jadavpur University. He is an alumni of the university for securing first-class first position, both in undergraduate and postgraduate. So today, his talk is entitled, a very, very interesting and fascinatingly titled study, Literature in Times of Crisis, Challenges to the Ethos of Sahitya, being with. Dr. Mukhopadhyay, I thank you again for being with us. Over to you, Dr. Mukhopadhyay. Looking forward to a fantastic speech.
Thank you very much for introducing me. Am I audible and visible to all of you?
Yes. Yes.
Is everything fine? Is there no technical problem, I guess? I think there's no technical problem regarding or visibility. Okay. So for inviting me for this program and asking me to sort of deliver this lecture on this particular topic. I mean, I said that I would be talking about migration, you know, the pandemic, literature, all these things, but I also said that I would mainly focus on the philosophical aspect of this. And, you know, in a way, I would like to address the basic issues regarding ethics, which are troubling us nowadays. Particularly, you know, with reference to the emergence of this pandemic and how it has actually necessitated some kind of ethical reorientation in us. And if we don't reorient ourselves ethically, then probably we won't be able to address properly and sufficiently the issues which we need to address. So first of all, let me begin by talking a little bit about the concept of Sahitya, which, as we all know, is a bit different from the concept of literature. From the Western perspective, we talk about literature, which is etymologically connected to the issue of writing. On the other hand, in India, we have had an oral culture, and most of our literary texts, our literary classics, were primarily oral texts. So that was also the case in the West. Probably, it's not just a matter of cultural difference. For instance, the Homeric epics were also orally transmitted. But the point is that in our culture, what we have understood to be Sahitya is probably more than what is understood as literature, because Sahitya is grounded in an ethos which I would like to see as an ethical orientation rather than in any technique of writing. So when we talk about Sahitya, we need to talk about the ethos of being with or witness, something which has some kind of resonance with the existentialist's idea about being in the world and being with the others. And I think it is at this point of time that we need to focus more clearly on this particular aspect of Sahitya as not just literature, not just writing about the others, but rather as the ethos of being with the others, and what kind of apodictic situations are facing us. Now, the first thing that we need to notice in this context is that it's really very difficult to be physically with the others, with the larger societal structure in the time of the pandemic, because at this moment we can't go out in a way, we are all living like the protagonist of Tagore's Dark Horror post office. Because outside there is the threat of the pandemic, there is the threat of the disease. So there is this problem with Sahitya, at a fundamental level. Now, you can't really be with the others in the way you used to be, in the pre-pandemic times, and you can't really be part of the societal structure of togetherness, of Sahitya. So there is some kind of aporia facing us at the heart of this very ethos of Sahitya at the present moment. So how to be with the others at this moment? Of course, the digital media is there, and the digital platforms are helping us. In fact, many people are writing poetry online because the circulation of books has also become minimized. There are a lot of problems. For instance, it's not the case that in all parts of India you have the delivery of books by Amazon with the equal speed or equal ease. So that is another problem, and I know about this because teaching at central institutions, we know about the problems that the students coming from various nooks and corners of India are facing now. So that is a big problem. This is one thing regarding the sort of material problem of being with the others and sending books from one part to another. So the physicality of Sahitya, as it were, the materiality of Sahitya has become problematized by this pandemic. But at a deeper level, and this is the level that I would be talking about in my lecture, at a deeper level, the problem that we are facing is fundamentally an ethical problem. There is, how to be with the others. Now, on the one hand, there is this threat of contagion, there is this threat of infection that once you try to be with the others in the larger societal space, once you try to be physically with the others, so once you try to be in physical proximity to your fellow citizens, you are always under the threat of contagion, right? So what should you do? And that's why we are talking about social distancing and so on and so forth. But the problem is that when this kind of situation emerges, you find that there are certain situations where probably it is more important to be physically with the others than being with the others on the digital platforms. For instance, if someone is dying of coronavirus, what will you do? If someone is suffering from coronavirus, what will you do? I mean, would you go out and try to help that person, or would you try to distance yourself from that person? Should you let that person die, or should you try to help him or her out, even though that might involve a risk on on your own life? So these are the questions which are facing us now, and these are very serious questions. These are not just philosophical or or discursive problems. These are palpable problems which we'll have to deal with. If we don't deal with these problems, then we don't know, and we won't be able to know what kind of ethical trajectory we can take, not just during the pandemic, but also after it. So in this context, I would like to talk about the Lavenasian ethics. Now, as many of you probably know, Emmanuel Levinas is a philosopher, and he's famous for his work on ethics. He talks about certain interesting things regarding our ethical orientation to the others. He says that actually when you try to be ethical, you need to begin with a process of risking your own self. So it's not a simple process where you just say that you are being altruistic, you are being sort of loving towards the others or cooperative towards the others, but rather at a fundamental ontological level, there needs to be some kind of not just openness, but even let's call it some kind of courage, which would let you be ethical even in the face of the threat of the extinction of the self, right? So he talks about ethics beginning with this risking of the self, and he says that without risking yourself, being toward the other is impossible. In other words, we can say that Sahitya, or being with the others, is impossible without the risking of the self. Now, this is something which can be said easily, but this is not something which can be performed easily. So at the performative level of this ethics, there are a lot of problems. And I think the coronavirus problem, the COVID crisis, has actually made us face the apodictic situation which emerges from this concept of ethics. Now, if you closely look at the situation today, you will find that without a Lavenasian ethics, you can't really be ethical towards the others. Without risking yourself, without risking your own life, you can't actually help the others. Because the others are, if you think that you can save both yourself and the other, that is probably not possible in many cases. For instance, think about the doctors who are dying while trying to help the patients, while treating the patients. So they are risking their selves. And we need to understand that though there are various ways of being ethical at this point of time, of course, you can be ethical in an indirect way as well, but the COVID crisis claims, or rather demands, that you should be ethical only in the sense that you are able to risk yourself for the sake of the others. So it is altruism, not just in terms of thinking about the other, but it is altruism in terms of taking the risk to sort of to die for the sake of the others. And we are sometimes talking about martyrdom, sacrifice and all these things, but the problem is that when we try to do that, when we say, okay, some people are martyrs in this COVID crisis, in this COVID battle, some people are sacrificing their lives, we actually take the unethical course, because what we try to do in that way is that, in that process, is that we actually try to shift the onus of being ethical to certain people. Okay, so if the doctors are dying while treating the patients, let's sort of memorialize them. Okay, but we are not going to go out. Now, I am not, of course, saying, of course, I'm not saying that we should all go out and, we should all sort of let the contagion spread. That's not the import of my speech. But what I'm trying to say is that we need to acknowledge that at the heart of the present crisis, there is an ethical aporia, which is fundamentally an aporia regarding the very ethos of Sahitya, witness, or being with the others. Because while we have come to understand, since the emergence of the print culture, that we can be with the others through a mediated, in a mediated way. For instance, you can write something and it will be published, and then indirectly there is some kind of correspondence between the author and the reader. So the reader is a distant reader. The reader is not in front of you. There is this mediating sort of role played by the print media, and there is Sahitya, there is witness, there is this process of being with, but nevertheless that is a mediated way of being with. Now, when we go back in time, we come to understand that that was actually not the case with the very concept of Sahitya. Sahitya in the ancient cultures, or even in the folk cultures, and this is very important because when we talk about ancient cultures versus modern cultures, we often tend to forget that cultures throughout the world don't operate along a along a linear axis. There are various zigzag trajectories for the transformations of cultures, for the evolution of cultures. For instance, it's not really the case that oral cultures have become extinct. As we know, in our own country, we have a lot of vibrant oral cultures. So we need to be sensitive to that as well. So it's not the case that there is just a kind of mediated Sahitya, a mediated kind of witness or being with. In today's India, there is also an unmediated witness. For instance, you have to think about the folk traditions of drama, the folk traditions of katha, for instance. Someone is engaged in storytelling, and that is not something which is extinct. That culture still exists there in our country, in various parts of our country, as well as in various parts of the world. So when we think about Sahitya in this situation, we need to try to get back to those earlier times of doing Sahitya or engaging in the ethos of Sahitya, being with. And we need to understand that that kind of direct witness is important even at this moment. Even though there are always troubles associated with it. For instance, if someone is dying of coronavirus just beside your home, in your neighborhood, what should you do? So actually there is no easy answer, and if you ask me what kind of answer I have, I would say that I don't really have an answer. I can't say that one should just go out and sort of try to sort of handle this. Because of course, at one point you need to think about the importance of resisting the channels of social transmission of the disease. But at the same time, we need to understand that if everyone thinks that let the others die, then probably everyone will die. Okay, so some kind of radical risking is necessary. Now, again, I would say that this is not something which we can very easily do. In fact, I am myself not doing this, right? So it's not that I am going out and helping the others. But my point is that when we are doing Sahitya at this moment of crisis, we need to be sensitive to what we don't do or what we can't do. So rather than just trying to write some poems on say this leader of the Oxford team that is looking into the possibilities of creating a virus, creating a vaccine. Rather than doing that, rather than just shifting the onus of ethicality to the others and then trying to memorialize them and celebrate them, what we should do is that we should try to understand that we are guilty of non-involvement in an ethical process. That consciousness of guilt is very important, and I think the kind of writing that we are doing today must begin with this point of guilt. And in that sense, I think today's literary ethos should have something in common with what Adorno said about post-Holocaust poetry. He said that post-Holocaust poetry would be barbaric, Now, there are a lot of interpretations. Some critics have said that he really didn't say that after Holocaust no poetry is possible. He probably tried to say that after the Holocaust, poetry should have a very different kind of feature. But I'm not getting into that debate. That's a completely different issue. What I'm trying to do is that, what I'm trying to say is that we need something of that sort, some kind of self-awareness as literary practitioners, because I am from the discipline of literature. So I'm mainly talking about the discipline of literature, but I am also thinking about the disciplines of humanities at large. So what we need to do is that whatever we are doing, writing poetry, writing papers, doing webinars, whatever, we need to begin with the awareness that we are able to do this because somewhere some people are dying for the sake of our health. Okay, and that is exactly the situation today. If you think about the doctors, the health workers who are dying out of it, you need to understand that your life should be grounded in the ethical awareness of some kind of survivor's guilt. At least I am seeing it in that way. You know, I am surviving in the face of this coronavirus because some people are dying. So in a way, I feel guilty of my life at this moment. And if I do poetry, if I write poetry, if I do Sahitya, quote unquote, then I will do that with this consciousness. Okay, with this consciousness alive in myself. Then let's move to the other possible sort of paradigms for thinking about this kind of self-risking ethicality, or something that we might probably call a kind of suicidalist, a kind of suicidal ethicality. Now, this kind of suicidalism appears to be problematic, at its surface. We have to acknowledge that. For instance, I have myself been intrigued with this idea. For instance, I am associated with the Ramakrishna mission, and many Ramakrishna mission monks would say that you need to sacrifice yourself for the sake of the others. And I initially found this idea quite absurd. I mean, why should I sacrifice my life? Okay, it's very fine to sort of help the others, but if you say that the annihilation of the self is to be welcomed, then is it not some kind of some kind of absurd proposition that is it not some kind of suicidal proposition? But it is at this moment of the COVID crisis that I have come to understand that actually true ethicality is something which is dangerous for the ontological stability of the self, and we have to acknowledge that. If we think that the self will be ontologically stable and at the same time ethical, then probably that is no more possible at the time of the COVID crisis. And this is something which is not being played out at an abstract level, but rather this is something which is being played out at a very concrete, palpable level in our day-to-day lives today. So we have to understand that. Now, it's not that it's only in Levinas's ethics that you find this kind of paradigm, this kind of call for sacrificing or risking the self. In our own culture, in the Indic culture also, we have that. For instance, think about the story of the dog accompanying Yudhishthira in the Mahaprasthanika Parva, in the Mahabharata, where Yudhishthira finally says that he is not going to go to the heaven if the dog is not allowed to enter the heaven, right? So he's ready to sort of risk his own non-entry, so to speak, to the heaven for the sake of the dog. Okay, so he's sort of prepared to do that. In the same way, there is the Buddhist tradition which talks about this kind of self-risking ethicality. For instance, in Aryashura's Jatakamala or Bodhisattva Vadanamala, and this story is also there in the Pali canon of the Jataka narratives. It's called the Shasha Jataka or the Sasa Jataka in Pali, where you have the story of the selfless hare. So the story goes that there were certain animals, and Bodhisattva was born as a hare, and there are some other animals around him as well. And he would teach these other animals the ethics of helping others, the ethics of self-sacrifice for the sake of the others, the ethics of generosity, and so on and so forth. So at one point, Shakra, who is the god of who is the king of the gods, decides to come to the earth and test these animals, and he asks this hare for some food, but the hare says that I have just a few grasses with me, and of course he can't feed the king of the gods with green grasses. So he says, I am going to sacrifice my own life, and he asks Shakra to light a fire so that he can throw himself into the fire, and then the king of gods can eat his meat. Now, it is a metaphoric moment of what I have already defined as the suicidalist ethics, that if necessity be, if needs be, you will have to sacrifice yourself in order to help the others. So that kind of idea is there. Now, apart from this, I would also like to talk about the problem of writing poetry at this moment, the problem of writing anything creative at this moment. As I have already said, at the outset, we need to understand that there should be some kind of consciousness of guilt. That we are surviving, we are able to write poetry because someone else is dying. Okay, so what we write today is predicated on, as it were, ontologically predicated on the sacrifice of the others, the risking of the selves of the others, right? So I'm not saying that we should stop writing poetry, but the point is that we should write poetry with this kind of consciousness of guilt in our mind, as it were. And the other thing is that while we are often talking about this crisis, this moment of pandemic, as something which signals a break in the flow of the human civilization, we need to understand that it's not just a break, it's not just a moment of crisis or kairos. If we think about the differentiation between chronology and chirology that was made by Giorgio Agamben, it's not just about a shift from the chronos mode of time to a kairos mode of time, but rather it is something which requires our deepened understanding of history. It is something which requires us to understand that everydayness is grounded in history. And literary affect, poetic affect, must address those interstitial points where everydayness and historicity bleed into each other. This is very important for our understanding of our present problems. For instance, if you see a news item in the morning in the newspaper, and if you write a poem about that in the evening, some kind of propagandist poem which would have a kind of what I would call a pseudo affect, but which would actually be an adiaphorized kind of cultural production. Adiaphorized in the sense of Zygmunt Bauman's use of this term. Bauman actually says that through adiaphorization, you sort of try to normalize the process of making one insensitive to the suffering of the others. So if you write that kind of poetry, then that's fine. But the problem is that that is not really something which meets the ethical demands which are put forward by this coronavirus. On the other hand, if you are writing poetry on the basis of what is happening around you, of course you have to be sensitive to what is happening around you, your everydayness, the everydayness in your society. But when you look at that, you need to look at the historical roots of this everydayness as well. This is one thing. Then second, I might sound very prescriptive, but it's not really about prescriptiveness. It's about, about some ethical concerns about writing poetry, about doing literature, not just about writing poetry or writing literature, but also about talking about literature itself. Okay, that is what we do. We are, the literary practitioners. We are the literary scholars, students, professors, or whatever. So we deal with literature, and we need to radically rethink our own positionality in the literary academy. What are we actually doing, and what should we actually be doing? Okay. And again, I repeat, the situation is aphoretic. There is no clear answer. So it is a time when you can only address the problems. We as the humanities teachers can probably address the problems, but the solutions are not available in our hands unless we are ready to risk our own lives and risk our own selves. Now, I am not saying that we should risk our own selves or lives. That would be a too broad. This is not a statement which this is not a statement which noise, I guess. Okay, now it's fine.
Chaudhary, kindly mute yourself.
Hello.
Sir, please continue. Yes.
Well, now this is one thing, and the other thing is that there is also this necessity for our radical ethical thinking today. And that is possible only when we come to understand that for us, literature needs to be grounded in the ethics of Sahitya rather than just an ethics of writing about the others. So there is a difference between the trope of witness and the trope of witness, being with someone. So when you witness somebody, or witness something from a distance, then you can write poetry, you can write philosophy, you can do all kinds of things. But at the same time, you need to understand that that is not probably as ethically sound as being with the others. For instance, let's think about a hypothetical situation where someone is dying. Now, if someone is dying, you can look at that and you can write a poem about that, or you can take a photograph of that dying person, but you can also go to that person and try to save that person. So we all know it. We don't need some kind of training to understand which position, which kind of activity, which kind of enterprise in this context would be more ethical than the other. Okay. Secondly, when we think about suffering in this context, we need to understand that suffering is not just a matter of singularity, but rather it's a matter of constellations. For instance, whenever we are seeing someone suffering, we need to understand that there are multiple silhouettes of sufferers behind that person. Okay, so we need to penetrate into the surface of the affairs around ourselves. Okay, so poetry needs to be deep at this moment and not superficial. Now, having said this, let me move to this issue of poetic production at this moment. Poetic production on particularly this issue of migration, the problems of the workers, and so on and so forth. Now, before starting to talk about that, I would like to mention that when we talk about migration, particularly the problem of migrant workers and all these things, we need to understand that this is a problem which is grounded in a long history. So there's actually no point in trying to superficially deal with this problem, or in trying to see this problem as just a problem of today. For instance, we need to look into the historical evolution of this problem. Many of the problems which we are facing today may appear at the first, at the first look to be abrupt problems that have come to us all of a sudden. But if you look deeply into these problems, you will find that all of them have a very complex history of their genesis, right? So that is something we need to do. And in this context, I would like to point out that I am now working on one particular project with Professor Vaneshri, who is the emeritus professor, Professor Emerita of English in Lavenasian University. We are working on the history of rural to urban migration and how that was reflected in literature, particularly in Hindi literature, okay, coming from North and Central India. Because when you look at the very interesting, and a wide array of literary texts dealing with these problems, mostly fictional texts, you find that this is a problem which has actually been represented in literature, and this is a problem which is not really just a problem associated with the COVID crisis. This is a problem which is at least as old as the early 90s. Okay, I'm not saying that it began in the early 90s, it actually began long before that. But the problem is that when we talk about the migrant worker today, we need to think about the history of this entire problem rather than just trying to blame somebody, some government, or or some kind of group or something like that. Rather than doing that, we need to look into the entire history of this problem, because when this history was enacting itself, we actually kept silent. We didn't pay heed to it. For instance, we were thinking about the diasporic writers, the people who migrated to the West, the NRI writers. So, so the literary departments are flooded with dissertations on diasporic writers and so on and so forth, but we actually didn't pay the heed that, we didn't pay the sufficient attention that we needed to pay to the crisis at home, to the crisis at hand, the problem of rural to urban migration in India itself. And that's why it's very important to excavate the literary representations of this problem. And there are, in fact, some very interesting stories. For instance, there is a story by Shailendra Anand. It's called Uttaputtar, which is about a storyteller in a village. And it's about how that storyteller finally finds his art form, this art of storytelling collapsing because of the sorrow that he has to go through due to his son's migration to another place. Okay. So the kind of layered impact of rural to urban migration, the kind of multi-layered impact that was there on rural life at the cultural level, at the political level, at the social level, that needs to be chronicled. And that's why I'd say that rather than just writing something about what happens today, that, in the morning you have seen the migrant workers filing out of a city, and in the evening you you shed crocodile's tears and you write some poem on that. That's not what you are supposed to do today. If you do that, then you are doing literature, but of course you are not engaging in the ethos of being with, you are not engaging in what I have presented as Sahitya within quotes. Then let's move to some of the literary texts which are being produced at this point. Now, the first problem is with the existential crisis that is being faced by the migrant workers. Why is it the case that they're in such a kind of apparently unprecedented, unprecedentedly chaotic situation today? The reason is that it's not just the case that the host society, for instance, in the case of the rural migrant workers, in fact, that very phrase migrant worker is very problematic, because as we know, in India, people are supposed to move from one place to another. We are not supposed to talk about migration, but unfortunately everywhere there is some kind of ethnocentrism, right? So and we ourselves are participating in that, knowingly or unknowingly. For instance, many Bengali intellectuals are talking about this issue of migrant workers and so on and so forth, but it's not really the case that they themselves are very sensitive to the migrant workers who come to West Bengal from other parts of India, but rather they often say extremely nasty things about the people who come from outside Bengal to Bengal, okay, and serve us. So let's try to be self-critical rather than continuously pointing our finger to the others, to the governments, or to some other agency. Okay, as I said, this is the time to be introspective. This is the time to look within ourselves. This is not the time to look at the others. This is not the time to try to objectify the others in your poetry. This is not the time to exoticize the other, but rather this is the time to reflect on your inability to meaningfully and effectively connect with the other. Okay, so your inability to be with the other. This is the time for mourning. This is the time for mourning for what we can't do. This is not the time to blame the others. That's my point. Okay, now the first problem is that when we think about the migrant workers, it's not just about a problem with the host society, the city in which they work, and the city which sort of throws them back, but rather it's also a problem about their homes. And by home, I don't mean just the home society, so a migrant worker is coming from state A to state B, so B is the home state and A is the host state. I'm not talking about that. I am using the term home in a more expanded and expansive sense, okay, both ethically and existentially. For instance, when we talk about the home, we have to talk about their own relatives in their villages or the neighbors in their villages. We often find that they are being seen suspiciously by their own relatives or even by the neighbors who are there, okay, in their villages. So the home itself has become a problematic site. The home is not really what you return to, right? But rather the home is a kind of slippery, shivering, and a kind of ontologically unstable receptacle. It's not a steady receptacle that can really accommodate you once you come back from the host society or the host city. So this binarization of the home and the host has become problematic. So the host as hostile and home as welcoming, that binary works no more. Then again, let's come back to a little bit of etymology. Interestingly, if you look at the Sanskrit term griha, where from the Bengali term ghar has come, griha is etymologically connected with this concept of graha, which means which is associated with the concept of grahan. So taking someone, accepting. And interestingly, very interestingly rather, I find a kind of cross-cultural validation of this kind of idea of griho or or ghar as something that takes you in, that welcomes you, that accepts you. In Robert Frost's poem, The Death of the Hired Man. Now, there Warren says, home is the place where when you have to go there, they have to take you in. In fact, it is about a story where a worker who used to work on their estate has returned after a considerable period of time, and it's not really the case that there was a good relationship between the hired man, and the hirer, between Warren and this worker. But nevertheless, now this man has come back because somehow he sees that estate as his home. Now Warren says home is the place where when you have to go there, they have to take you in. So again, look at the concept of taking one in. Now this statement has been read as a sarcastic statement by certain critics. They say that Warren is not really welcoming, which is true. He rather makes a sarcastic comment that, is it really the case that I have to take him in simply because he has come back, or should I rather drive him away? And then maybe, and this is very interesting because here we have the intrusion of a feminine kind of ethics, which is very different from the masculine form of ethics. And we need to remember here Carol Gilligan's idea of the ethics of care. Gilligan says that when we look at the textures of the discourses about ethics, we find two major paradigms. One is the discourse of justice, and one is the discourse of care. Now, in the discourse of justice, in terms of ethical thought, you have a focus on what is just and what is not just. On the other hand, in the ethics of care, you have a focus on caring irrespective of what is just and what is unjust in many cases. And interestingly, the same idea is being played out in Frost's poem. Mary, who is the sort of landlady on this estate, she says, I should have called it something you somehow had not to deserve. So she says that the home is something which one doesn't need to deserve. It is something which is supposed to spontaneously welcome the person, the homecomer, right? But as we understand, this is no longer probably possible in times of corona. There is some implicit kind of parameter as far as deserving or undeserving homecomers are concerned. As it were, if a person comes from outside and it's not certain that that person doesn't carry the virus, then that person really doesn't deserve to be at home. Okay, he or she is not supposed to come back home if they don't deserve the home because they have the virus, they have contracted the virus. So that kind of idea is there in the air, which is again a very deep problem. So it's not just about the host society. Whenever we talk about migration, we talk about the problem of the host society, what kind of approach the host society has towards the migrant. But here we need to talk about the problems at home as well, and how the home is making the very concept of homecoming impossible, or rather problematic. Let me very briefly refer to two poems that were written by Gulzar during the pandemic. Regarding this issue of migrant workers and their plight. Interestingly, when you read Gulzar's poems, you find that he is always referring to the historical continuum of post-independence India while talking about the crisis of migrant workers in the pandemic situation. He's never saying that it is just the pandemic which is responsible for this kind of crisis. Rather, he's continuously reminding you that there are historical parallels as far as the post-independence Indian history is concerned, as far as our post-colonial history is concerned. For instance, there is this poem. It's called Mazdoor Mahamari in Hindi, and it has been translated by Rakshanda Jalil into English. And the English poem, the English version is titled Migrating, COVID-19. The pandemic raged. The workers and laborers fled to their homes. All the machines ground to a halt in the cities. Only their hands and feet moved. Their lives they had planted back in the villages. So here he says that even though these migrant workers migrated from the villages to the cities, the core of their life had been planted back in their villages. Okay, so as it were, they knew that they were living their life, behind themselves, and they are now moving just to earn their livelihoods. So here, interestingly, and that is why I would say that this kind of poem actually looks at the problem in a very profound way, rather than just looking at it in a superficial way, in a journalistic way. Actually, he shows you how there was an insurmountable gap created between livelihood and life due to this this necessity for migration. Okay, so somehow in the villages there was a crisis with livelihood. That's why they had to migrate to the cities. But in the cities there was no life. They knew very well that they would be treated there as lifeless parts of a machine, a mammoth machinery. Okay, so they would be treated just as parts of a mammoth machinery. But then he also reflects on the problems of the problems in the villages. So he is not romanticizing the rural life. He is also talking about the crisis which was there in the villages. Okay, so and when you look at this, you find that there's really no point in just saying that the cities are cruel and the villages were wonderful, or that they shouldn't have migrated to the cities. You come to understand that through the historical process of urbanization and industrialization in India, the agrarian and rural societies faced a crisis which actually went unnoticed. Okay, somehow these points of crisis didn't receive the kind of attention which they really deserved. So Gulzar goes on in this way. The sowing and the harvesting was all back there, of the jowar, wheat, corn, bajra, all of it. Those divisions with the cousins and brothers, those fights at the canals and waterways, etc. So here he talks about the the social problems in the villages. For instance, there was continuous skirmish between the brothers in the single family. There was division in the family. So a big joint family would get divided into different portions. The earlier forms of familial and social togetherness would get fragmented. So interestingly, when you look at this poem, you get to understand that the fragmentation began in the villages themselves. The fragmentation didn't begin only with their migration to the cities. And that is why I'm saying that when you sensitively read history, and when you sensitively read history into everydayness and everydayness into history, you come up with a deepened understanding and expanded understanding of the problem at hand. So there you understand that the kairos and the chronos are actually not operating in a binaristic way, but rather they are intertwined in a very complex way. So he talks about the other problems, drought, flood, the fear, will the skies rain or not, so the dependence of the farmers on nature. But still, at this moment, they are longing for that quote-unquote home. And Gulzar writes, they will go to die there, where there is life. Here, they have only brought their bodies and plugged them in. they pulled out the plugs, come, let's go home, and they set off. And the poem actually ends in a very interesting way. It makes a striking oxymoronic assertion at the end. In Hindi, it is "Marenge to wahi jaakar jahan par zindagi hai." So "Marenge to wahi jaakar jahan par zindagi hai," or they will go to die there where there is life. Now, this is the point of the aporia that I was talking about. This is the point where you come to understand that the home is no more, less hostile than the host society, because it is quite possible that when they go back home, they will die, because probably there would not be the kind of health facility that is required to cure the corona patients. And yet, even if they are to die, they long to go back to their, to that ultimate receptacle of their corpses, as it were. So it's a kind of willingness, a bizarre kind of willingness, apparently bizarre, a willingness to go back to the village where they might die, but nevertheless, life is also there. Okay, so life was planted back. And if they are to end their life cycle, then they would go back there and end their life cycle. Now, apparently, this sounds a bit romantic or romanticizing in tone, but actually, it is not just a matter of romanticization. It is something which talks about the deep crisis that is staged by this coronavirus, okay, by the COVID-19. Because here homecoming is not really going to resuscitate you, but rather it might even be disastrous for you. Okay, but what is not so clearly touched on in this poem by Gulzar, but which I think he should have touched on, is the fact that the home itself is an unstable category at this point. Okay, when they go back home, probably they will not find the home there in the sense of a griha, something that that takes you in, that something that accepts you. Now, from this poem, now I move to another poem. This was originally written in Bengali. It is by Zakir Hossain Khokon. He is a supervisor of construction works in Singapore, and he belongs to the migrant workers. Who had to toil a lot in Singapore, and they had to face a lot of problems because of the sort of unhealthy conditions in their habitats and so on and so forth. So he has written on that. He is a celebrated poet, and he himself was diagnosed with COVID-19. So here, as opposed to the poem by Gulzar, we have a poem which is the poem by someone who has experienced all these things, right? The reason why I have taken up these two poems is that here you have the possibility of a juxtaposition of two poems. One is by someone who is trying to be with the other, and the other poem is by this quote-unquote other himself. Okay. So Zakir Hossain Khokon has written this poem called First Draft. It was originally written in Bengali, but I don't have the Bengali version with me. I have the English version, which has been translated from Bengali by Debabrata Bosu. So here in this poem First Draft, he is talking about the multiple aspects of the problems faced by the migrant workers in Singapore. And he is actually touching on all these aporias that I was talking about, that the home is unstable, the host society is problematic because the host society is no more sort of hospitable to you. So there is a crisis of hospitality. And if we think about this notion of hospitality, particularly, the ethos of hospitality as it has been celebrated by Ashish Dandi in Time Warps, we will find that this is probably a classic moment when this ethos of hospitality is deeply problematized, and it is deeply in a crisis. Okay, it's in a deep crisis. Now, Zakir Hossain Khokon says that the migrant workers are afraid because they are in a different country. So they really don't know how the administration of this country is going to treat them, and even if they are maltreated, they really don't have the resources, the political or cultural resources to fight back, because they are treated as raw manpower. Okay, so they know very well, they have come to understand that they are treated simply as labor, okay, embodiment of labor and not full human beings. So he questions that, but he also points at the multiple poles which are involved in this processual in this systematic kind of suffering that they go through. Okay. Now there is one. Let me just read out some portions. Hogan says the administration has stated wearing masks is mandatory, but they do not have masks. So he's talking about the migrant workers. Dormitory administration company, who will give them masks? Now he is looking at the network of exploitation, and this is a very complex network. There's no point, he knows very well that there is no point in saying that the host society is hostile, because the home society is not very welcoming either. It's not the case that the home is good and the host is bad. So that binary is being broken down here, and this is a very interesting thing. They are barred from going outside. If they don't have masks, how will they wear them? They gape at themselves. They can't understand who is belittling whom in this race of life. And then he's talking about the the nasty situation in the bathroom, in the toilet. It's in a severely unhealthy condition, because the people who are supposed to clean the toilets are afraid of cleaning them, lest they should be infected with the virus, and so on and so forth. Then there is an ironic twist in this poem. He says they swallow water to quench their thirst and sing, I have turned into a migrant, I roam around the world. The song is dramatized, made into videos and shared, but they remain scared. So he's continuously talking about fear, and this fear is generated due to the fact that they really don't have the status in the society that a full citizen is supposed to have. But that doesn't mean that only the host society is bad. He is continuously talking about the companies. He is talking about the agents. He is talking about the High Commission of his own country as well. He is in fact from Bangladesh. He is, he belongs to the group of migrant workers from Bangladesh to Singapore. Yeah. Now there is this kind of scathing criticism of the so-called quote-unquote home as well. Kokon says they are anxious. They know the High Commission is only there to parcel their corpses back home. So their life is bare life, really, in an Adamanian sense of the term. It's bare life, and it is seen as raw labor, not even as bare life. It appears that they are treated by this capitalistic system simply as raw labor, source of labor. And once they are dead, the corpses would be parceled back home. So either you are a source of labor or you are a corpse. The human subjectivity is continuously being denied to them. And then he comes to a very interesting point, because this is a kind of position which is opposed to our position as literary practitioners. So if on the one pole, Hello. Hello.
Yes, yes, you are now audible.
Am I visible? Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. So let me continue. So, and it says that even the journalists are afraid of someone, and this S of the someone is kept in the uppercase. Okay. Now, see, this someone may or may not be just the state, because we need to understand that most often the freedom of the press also means the freedom of the publishing house, freedom of the owner of the press, and not really the freedom of the journalists, right? So even the journalists are not really free. That is what he observes, because he is looking at the situation from a marginal vantage point. So he can see certain things which probably, if we look at it from the central positionality. Then he says sometimes literary folks and intellectuals visit them too. They inspire them to read, speak up, write, draw, take photographs, make films, but emphasize that their art should be calm and not explosive. So this is a tremendous, a tremendously ironical comment that the literary folks visit. They keep inspiring them to write in a in a benign way and not in an explosive way. So somehow the literary establishment itself and the literators themselves are involved in the process of maintaining the status quo. So the kind of holier than thou approach that the literary practitioners often assume is also being obliquely questioned by this person who belongs to this constellation of sufferers, as it were. And then again, he keeps harping on this issue of fear. He says they are afraid to read, they are afraid to write, they are afraid to draw. They are even afraid of appreciation for their success, and they have to embrace silence rather than speech. And he says that the migrant workers are resource and just manpower for the state, not full human beings. And towards the end, he says, now we are counting the numbers every night, the number of infected, the number of the dead, the number of breaths we take, we can't sleep, we read of our own nightmares, we draw our faces in the mirror in the hope of a green dawn. So finally, he is talking about the momentariness of the present, present existential situation, as it were. We are living from moment to moment. In a way, we are all doing that. But when we have this illusion of being privileged, we probably try to bracket off this momentariness of our life under the shadow of the coronavirus. We think that, okay, we are engaged in writing something, in doing something creative, in doing something substantial, some kind of academic activity. But we forget that it's actually very foolish to try to bracket off this kind of understanding, this kind of unconscious understanding of the momentariness of our life that has been induced by the virus. Then he says they lack empathetic ears, they are jittery of rest, they know rest won't earn them money, work pass and agents' fees combined with loans to throttle their existence. Now see, the interesting point is that here we come to understand that there is a very complex network of operation working here. Okay, so the work pass and the agents' fees, all these things are coupled with the material conditions of their living in the host society. Okay, so it's not so if you look at it superficially, you will just try to look at the way they are being treated by the state at the moment of the crisis. But we need to look at this very complex network of exploitation that was behind their status as migrant workers, as as it were not full citizens. They are petrified. They hide their diseases from roommates, companions, and friends. They are afraid of dying. They know that in this time of gloom, they are just numbers. Their close compatriots won't come to shoulder their mortal remains or to see them for one last time. And this is the problem, not just Konkan, not just for the migrant workers, but for everybody, for all of us. You know, it is something which is a problem for the privileged as well as the underprivileged. For instance, today if I die, I mean, no one is going to come and take me, because everyone is even afraid of the corpse, because the corpse is seen as a source of infection, and we all know what is happening around ourselves, right? I mean, people afraid of helping someone who has contracted the disease, because that might infect that person as well. And that is why I began by saying that if you are really to be ethical, you have to be suicidally ethical. You have to be ethical in the way the doctors are being ethical. There is no way you can compromise with this demand for suicidal ethicality today. Okay, if I can't do it, that's fine. I am unable to do it, but I have to acknowledge that I am unable to be suicidally ethical, and I have to live with this sense of guilt. If I don't feel guilt, this survivor's guilt, then probably I am not fully ethical. I am not really able to uphold this ethos of Sahitya or being with. And then he ends with some kind of some apparent hope. He says they will survive without fear, but really we don't know whether we can wait for a hopeful ending of this crisis or not. As we know, the vaccine may save us, but the problems which particularly the ethical problems, the foundational ethical problems which have been raised by this pandemic have to be taken into account. We have to be engaged in a comprehensive understanding of these problems, and only then can we think about a post-COVID ethicality, which the Buddhist kind of ethics about with reference to the Sasajataka story. But it is something which will require us to be prepared to be suicidally ethical. Okay, and we need to ask ourselves, are we really prepared for that or not? If we are not prepared, then that unethicality, that inability to be ethical, the inability to be ethical is something that has to be acknowledged. Okay. Because acknowledgement, some kind of oblique ethicality, some kind of mediated ethicality might have its side. Thank you. Question, the same questions are there.
Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Mukhopadhyay, for a very, very enlightening speech. You have, I understand, situated the very paradox of being with, from philosophical to the literary, the aporia that lies between the discourse of taking responsibility and the performing of taking responsibility. You have also analyzed the historicity of the migrant situation, and you have directly related how this instability is there in reality and in text, and how the real and the textual can negotiate. I have been requested by our distinguished panel members and everyone to take an expanded interactive session at the end after Professor Sabyasachi Chattopadhyay delivers his speech. So may I request you to just stay with us for an expanded interactive sessions at the end. We have a couple of
I will have to come back probably. Actually, I have some work to do. Okay. So I will have to come back. I can probably keep it on. Okay, but I will have to come back. Okay. I have some actually tomorrow we are going to have some programs here, so for that actually I just in fact took out this time 1 hour from
okay, so that's perfectly all right. There are a couple of questions, then I would just move on to what seemed to be a very relevant and interesting question, just one, which is An participant has asked, do you think this self-risking ethic is related to utilitarianism? You can look into your chat box. He says, do you think this self-risking ethic is related to utilitarianism?
Now see, this is a question which has been raised by many philosophers. For instance, whenever you talk about the necessity to risk the self, there is this anxiety that probably the collectivity is actually trying to get privileged. That's there. So in fact, the people, for instance, Jessica Barman has worked on this problem perspective, and she says that sometimes a patriarchal society may ask the female individual to risk herself while engaging in a kind of self-aggrandizing mode. Okay, so that kind of debate is there, but my point is that when we are looking at this situation from today's perspective, it's not just about utilitarianism or whether the collective should be privileged over the individual or something like that. In fact, it's not about the collective or the individual at all, because we are witnessing a complete fragmentation of the classic concept of the collectivity itself. We really don't know what kind of collectivity we are thinking about. Okay, from our own homes, from our own desks, we are talking about collectivity, but we are talking about some kind of virtual collectivity, just as this collectivity that is working in the virtual space. So I think today we need to renegotiate the kind of tension, the friction between a virtual collectivity and a palpable problem, which sort of concerns the concrete individuals around yourself. Okay, and that's why I have referred to Carol Gilligan's ethical ideas about the ethics of care, and particularly the feminist mode of ethics, which actually says that you can't talk about the collectivity without talking about the individuals. So there is this famous sort of statement in one novel by Simone de Beauvoir, where all means each of us. That is a very important issue, I think. So when you look at it from that way, then probably it's not just utilitarianist in nature.
Thank you, Anway, Dr. Mukhopadhyay, and Anway to me. We have chatted really, and thank you so much for being with us, and thank you so much for giving us a really, really interesting speech. Can I please our heartiest thanks from on behalf of the college and on behalf of the department, and keep well, stay healthy. And can I please request Professor Priyanka Mollik to now take over and introduce our next distinguished speaker. Yes, Priyanka, over to you.
Yeah, am I audible and visible?
Yes, you
Hello?
are.
Yes.
You are.
Thank you, Dept. So, good afternoon, everyone. Now we move on to the second part of the technical session, where we have Dr. Sabyasachi Chattopadhyay, who will be talking on contextualizing COVID, portraying the post-pandemic print culture. So let's use this opportunity to introduce you all to an erudite scholar like Dr. Chattopadhyay, who is an associate professor in the Department of History, University of Kalyani. He has also taught as a reader in New Alipur College in the Department of History. Dr. Chattopadhyay is an esteemed name in the world of academia with 4 prestigious awards, including Best Paper Award given by Department of Science and Technology in 2016, Ajay Ho Memorial Award in 2013, Boshundhara Award in 2008, Dr. Gopal Chandra Bhattacharya State Science Award for Popularization of Science in 1997. His research area includes history of science, technology, environment, medicine, communication, education, culture, women, labor, and contemporary history. His ongoing research project involves history of medicine, historiography of STEM, history of multidimensional science and health movement, and many more aspects. In his academic tenure, he has published his research works in many international and national peer-reviewed journals. Many of his works have been published as chapters in books. He has been associated as an active member and editor with various national and international prestigious institutions since the beginning of his professional career. Dr. Chattopadhyay, I heartily welcome you in this webinar, and I'm leaving the platform up to you now. Dr. Chattopadhyay?
Yes. Thank you, Priyanka, for a generous introduction. Now, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me in this webinar. Truly speaking, I am not a person belong to the literature. That's why I am a bit astonished when I received the invitation. Uh, I even doubt whether I can justify my candidature as a speaker in this webinar. Previous speaker and our honorable principal, Dr. Contextualising, who is Gorida to me, elaborately uh, mentioned various aspects of literature. Now, I would like to focus uh, some other parts of this uh, theme of the webinar. Now, I would like to present my presentation in a visual way, in a sense that I think it would be my, my visual would speak rather than me. Uh, is it visible? Is it visible now? Okay. Now, the title of the presentation is Contextualizing COVID, Portraying the Post-Pandemic Print Culture. And at the very outset, I would also put on record my sincere thanks to my student Portraying Mukhopadhyay, who is presently teaches history in a college, for helping me to convert my PDF collections to JPEG mode so that I can prepare my PowerPoint. Now, as the title suggests, I am mainly focusing on the print culture. This print culture includes both the form and content. Let's begin with a publication. This is the publication of the oldest surviving publishing agency of the South Asia. Yes, I repeat, this is the oldest surviving publishing agency of South Asia, the Asian Society of Bengal. All of us know that the society was established in 1784 and it has a monthly bulletin. Now, this monthly bulletin is not for public. It's meant for the members. Now, as the title suggests, that the bulletin is a monthly affair and it is meant for the members. I have already mentioned. As a member of the publication committee of the society, we made our monthly meeting, I remember, on 17th March, the last meeting that was held. On 16th, I went to my university. The lockdown was not declared at that time. Only the government of West Bengal had declared that the education institutions would be closed for 15 days or so on. And when I went to my university on 16th, the registrar issued a notice which says that we should not come again in the university. Just after that day, I went to the meeting of the publishing committee of the society. At that time, we don't have the idea that this kind of lockdown would be declared. So we planned for our next publication of bulletin, journal, etc. Ultimately, on 22nd March, the lockdown was declared. And what should we do? The publication secretary consulted with the members, and ultimately, it was decided that the monthly bulletin would be published as an online issue in an online platform. That's a major shift in the print culture. So the monthly bulletin, which is meant for the members only, now become public. And the first monthly bulletin in online platform, the only online platform, was published in April. It was published, I think, in the second part of April, 20 or 21st April, it was published with the cover, "We shall overcome." What should more appropriate caption can be provided to this uh, cover? So, "We shall overcome," that was the tone of the bulletin. And I would like to draw your kind attention to the contents of the bulletin. There, the scholars and the authors address the pandemic COVID-19, coronavirus disease 2019, COVID-19 basic principles for maintaining a healthy workplace, staying connected in an unconnected world. Please listen to the title, Staying Connected in an Unconnected World. My previous speaker has said that literary context, in the sense that it is challenge to the ethos of Sahitya, that's being with. So now, here an article was published with the title "Staying Connected in an Unconnected World." And there were articles on the past of pandemic, Black Death in Italy, whom to blame. And another article was on the future of the past, a short history of pandemic, various other pandemics, Spanish flu, plague, cholera, etc., etc. So that was the content which the Asian Society had published in its first online bulletin that became a public publication, and it changed the print culture of the World Days Publishing Institute. There are a number of articles have been published. The contents so long, and Public Secretary said that in the regular publication of bulletin, there are no contents, but he said that there should be a contents so that the reader should know what type of articles are there inside the book. So the book is not in his or her hand, book is in virtual platform. Let's look on the monthly bulletin of May 2020. The cover is of Rabindranath Tagore, and that was done by none other than Satyajit. And here we also reading a number of articles, and there are articles on May Day, on Satyajit Ray, on Rabindranath Tagore. I think we should know that the month of May belonged to both Ray and Rabindranath, and the bulletin addressed both the occasions. Along with that, there were a number of articles on epidemics, pandemics, plague, etc., etc. Let's move on to the June 2020 bulletin, where we have another excerpt of the literature of Rabindranath, Pakhi Amar Nider Pakhi Odhir Holo Keno Jani. So we became impatient after 3 months of lockdown, and that reflects in the writings and the art of the literary persons and the artists that were published in this bulletin. In the July bulletin, we have a specific message that is wear mask, combat COVID-19. So, if we study the bulletins of last 4 months of Asian Society, which were published in an online platform that was not printed in a so-called printed within quote sense, then we find that there was a paradigm shift because the target audience became a larger one, and it was available in WhatsApp, Facebook, etc. So the social media, it was available. Previously, it was not. If we find the contents of July issue, we find a number of contemporary issues had been touched by the authors and the publishers. Now, what is the aim of this kind of publication? We notice that a number of misconceptions are there in the present pandemic situation. So to combat this misconception, we should have the proper knowledge. The knowledge is the back through which we can make an over boundary to this kind of virus of what we can say that is pan-infodemic or infodemic. That is a major problem. So we should have the proper knowledge, for which the Bulletin of Society tried to communicate the proper knowledge with its readers. And the knowledge is the shield, knowledge is the weapon to combat not only the virus, but also various infodemic, which are mainly false, and they are flooded in our WhatsApp messages, Facebook messages, etc., etc. So we have to combat those infodemic along with the virus. Now, COVID-19 just saying that I am not a virus, but a teacher. Have you understand now why education, health services, and scientific temperament are most crucial for the nation and society? That is, that virus is asking himself, that Skytoon suggests. Now let's move on. The other publication of Bangla literary magazine Desh. If we notice the first publication during lockdown period, the title of that publication, that is cover story, was Pradurbhav. Pradurbhav means means the occurrence of a particular epidemic or something, Rogir Pradurbhav, Mohamari Pradurbhav. And in the advertisement of the issue, it was clearly stated that, I quote, পূর্ববর্তী বিজ্ঞাপনে জানানো হয়েছিল দেশব্যাপী লকডাউনের কারণে নির্ধারিত সময় দেশ 2 এপ্রিল 2020 সংখ্যাটির মুদ্রণ সম্ভব হচ্ছে না, তার পরিবর্তে এই সংখ্যার ডিজিটাল সংস্করণটি পাঠক পাবেন এবিপি ম্যাক্স অ্যাপে। Now it has been said that this magazine is not printed, but we are reading this magazine in a printed version, but in a digital platform. That's something different from the earlier occasion. And it was clearly stated what was the topic. It said, Mohamari Otimari পৃথিবীতে হয়েছে একাধিক, আবারও এক জীবাণু দৌরাত্মে বিপর্যস্ত বিশ্ব, গণজীবন, গণপরিসর, ইতিহাসে, সংস্কৃতিতে, অর্থনীতিতে কিভাবে প্রভাব ফেলে মারি বা ফেলছে সাম্প্রতিক করোনা ভাইরাস, তার অনুসন্ধান করা হচ্ছে এই পত্রিকায়। It was stated clearly in the contents. Please notice that at that time, Anandabazar Group, ABP Group, prefers Dirgho Ikar to Mohamari and Otimari. Later, it shifted from Dirgho Ikar to Hrasyo Ikar, Mohamari and Otimari. But Mohamari Otimari should have Dirgho Ikar. The next issue was entitled as Ochol Groho. That means our planet became a standstill. Our planet became standstill, and here is the picture in the cover story entitled Ochol Groho. And there it was stated that Vishwabhi lockdown স্তব্ধ নগর গ্রাম, অনাহুত এক বিরতি পর্বে, আক্রান্ত মানুষের জীবিকা, দৈনন্দিন কাজকর্ম রোজগার, লকডাউনের প্রভাব অনুভূত হচ্ছে আমাদের ব্যক্তিগত জীবনে। So here the world, inner world and outer world has been touched by Desh. The inner world, that's our personal life, has been touched by this lockdown. So that is the aim of Sahitya, to bring with us. And it was stated that this magazine can be read without paying any money to ABP through ABP Max apps, so that there was a shift in reading habit. You have to download ABP Max app and then you have to read without paying any money to the publisher. Let's look into the second May publication. Title of the month's publication was Nibhritwe Niketone, that is isolation. So here we are viewing the cover. The cover story was Nibhritwe Niketone, that's quarantine for a number of days. It was previously, all of you know, it was 40 days in Italy in 14th century. Later, in our case, quarantine for 14 days. Ironically, this a fortnight magazine, and there are 2 issues in a month. So, Nibhritwe Niketone, that was the first issue published 2nd May, and there it is stated that বিশ্বব্যাপী অচল এই পরিস্থিতিতেও শিল্পীর সৃজন প্রতিভা অক্ষুণ্ণ, তার আত্মবীক্ষণে যথার্থ প্রকাশ গল্প, কবিতা এবং ছবির নিভৃত লোকে। So that is the aim of literature. The creative job was not halted because of this kind of epidemic or pandemic. And there we find an interesting article on the People's Health Movement under the leadership of Swami Vivekananda, who led the movement during the plague in Kolkata. And we find the role played by Sister Nivedita in this aspect. And there, the contemporary situation had been touched by the authors, where the Kerala model was prized for successful in combating the pandemic. Now, the second issue of May 2020 of Desh was the second part of this quarantine or isolation, namely Nibhritwe Niketone Titiyo Porbo. It was stated, the same line was repeated in the second part. And there we find a number of interesting creative writings. I have to mention the drama written by Brakto Bosu, which is Corona Dilgurute Prem. We have already heard the writing mentioned by our honorable principal. So, love in the time of cholera, now love in the time of corona, written by Brakto Bosu. So that is, we can say, what literature can do in the time of pandemic or in the time of crisis. 2nd June issue, that's the last issue, which was published in digital form only. And it says, just compare with the publication of Asian Society. In the last issue of the Bulletin of Asian Society, we find that the people are using masks. And here in Desh, we find the cover story, Mukh Theke Jay. Now, that reminds us the famous poem written by Shankho Ghosh, Mukh Theke Jay Bigyapone. Now, here we find Mukh Theke Jay mask. It stated, Mukh Theke Jay, রোগ সজ্জায় বিশ্ব, মাঝখানে হলো, আমরাও তাই ছিলাম। এবার ধীরে ধীরে স্বাভাবিকে ফেরার দিকে এগোচ্ছি। লকডাউন থেকে আনলক 1-এ প্রবেশ করছি, কিন্তু রোগের ভয় থেকেই যাচ্ছে। আমাদের অভ্যাসে তাই একাধিক পরিবর্তন দেখা যাবে। That brings us the term new normal. And the title of this webinar also has the this particular term which called as new normal. Towards new normal, as the title suggests of your webinar, pandemic and migration in literary context. So I am concentrating on the history of the contemporary days. I am mainly speaking on the basis of the sources which I have collected during these pandemic days. Now we are talking about new normal, that is new normal. We are using masks, we are washing our hands with soaps and sanitizers, and the coronavirus, that is COVID-19, is looking on us. How can he or she, I don't know what is the gender of virus, is looking whether he or she would be able to infect us or not. Now we are talking about social distancing. Social distancing. Previously we have the lines I are bete bete thaki. Now we are saying that we should maintain distance among ourselves. That is the new normal. But in this case, we have to be being with others through literature, through the print culture. Our physical distancing uh, would be replaced by the bond through literature, that is being with literature. Now I'm using these cartoons from COVID Kotha. This is another important publication that was published in the first phase of lockdown. That was a multimedia guide for mass awareness. It was published by the National Council for Science and Technology Communication, Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. It was a manual or multimedia guide which comprises the A to Z to combat COVID. And there we find a number of skytoons. I have used a number of skytoons, and for that I would like to acknowledge R. Rajbongshi, who did these skytoons for these wonderful skytoons that were published in COVID Kotha in 2020 in Sisters publication. That is another government publication, but published only in digital form. Let's move on. Some other publications. We are viewing the cover page of Prutiti. Prutiti means reliance. Prutiti means confidence. And it published a special issue, namely Mari Shongbad. I think most of you have heard the name Mari Shongbad, a famous theater that was staged by Chetona, led by Mukhopadhyay. So that Mari Shongbad was followed in naming a special issue called Mari Shongbad. That was published in June 2020, and in the cover page we find Swami Vivekananda was speaking on play in a classic theater, and Sister Nivedita was there along with him, and that picture was taken from Vivekananda Samakalin Bharatbarsho, written by Shankar Bosu. And if we go through the contents of the publication, we find a number of issues have been touched by this publication, and there are many experts from different parts of the world written their articles in Bangla. We find an article written by a scholar in physiology. He resides in Germany. She resides here, and some other topics, namely the role of COVID in bringing back our environment in a less pollutant state. We find a number of what we can say superstitions related to this kind of pandemic, and we find the role of science movement in combating this uh, pandemic situation. After that, another issue was published, and that was July 2020 issue, and the name of that issue was lockdown. So we see that in government publication of Asiatic Bulletin, in Desh or in Pratiti, there are phases. The first phase, we find the main emphasis was on the COVID-19. The emphasis was on the pandemic situation. Later, the emphasis focus changed from pandemic to lockdown. And there we also see the uh, presence of literature. Here we find a poem written by Joydev Bosu. I quote, বৃশ্চিক রাশির নিচে যে মানুষ শুয়ে আছে ভাষাহীন কপর্দকহীন তাকে দাও রূপ কথা তাকে দাও যথার্থ মনীষা. He is talking about the migrant labor in this context, and here we see the picture of migrant labor. My previous speaker has spoken a lot on this migration. Here I would like to mention a poem written by Nirendranath Chakraborty that was published in his book Sotto Seleucus, where he has stated that what is the home? It is the place where I can find me I can find me free to do my work. And my previous speaker has said the Guldar's poem and the poem written by a person who written his poem in Bangla, the same ethos are reflected in the poem and in this magazine. Here we find all the articles written on the lockdown, science movement in lockdown, the gender question during lockdown, the question of class, gender, etc. was touched by various authors, and lockdown environment. Lastly, there were supplement on the Amphan issue, that was the Amphan disaster that was held in May 2020, and a number of articles had been published on the relief program, refrigeration program in Sundarban during pandemic and during Amphan. Now, let's talk about another important publication, that is Bigyan Katha. It was published by Bigyan Prashar, that is an organ of DST Government of India. Bigyan Prashar mainly works in disseminating science in a popular way and in the language of the common people. Now, previously, Bigyan Katha has, the Bigyan Prashar has only English and Hindi publications. During lockdown, the first issue of Bigyan Katha, a science magazine in Bangla, was published in the month of May. And in June issue, we find a special issue on COVID. There is a thing to be noted. It's a digital publication, but there's something different. If you find that publication, you would get a feeling of turning the page like the book. It's available on online.flipbuilder.com. That is, you are just have the feeling of turning the earlier page and to read the next page. That's the picture clearly suggests. that is the flip builder, that is the last issue. And if you click this point, then you should get the first page, then you can turn. For your convenience, I am giving you the access of this magazine. That's online.flipbuilder.com. You may search the magazine there. Thus, we are noticing there is change not only in the contents but also in the form. In the digital platform, previously we were accustomed with the www, that is World Wide Web, but now it has changed to a digital book format. That is something different and it's unique. Let's move to other books. Deshkal Bhavna, a contemporary periodical. They published the issue in April on this epidemic, Mohamari. And if you find the contents, you see COVID-19 and Indian economics, COVID-19 and the politics, both politics of union government, politics of state government, politics of political parties, and the issue how Kerala government successfully did combat this pandemic. Along with that, all of us know that China is allegedly responsible for this kind of pandemic, and here we find an article on the public health in China. In the next issue, we have epidemic number 2 in Deshkal Bhavna. There we have a number of articles on digital learning. We are talking about the digital divide, and here is an article on COVID-19 and digital learning. The role of Government of West Bengal in combating this COVID-19, and a number of articles on the migrant laborers, the role of state, etc. So the party politics, the class question has been addressed by the magazine, the contemporary periodicals. And there we have an interesting article on Lenin and epidemic. Now we have another important publication, namely Somojibi Bhasha, which portrays it as a conversation between the leftism and democracy. And it had published a number of issues on the particular pandemic situation. As the cover suggests, the inequality in our own country and in the world due to COVID-19. A number of articles have been published on the issue of migrant laborers. Not only the migrant laborers who are coming to our state, but also the people who live in West Bengal, who are living in West Bengal, what was their condition during the pandemic situation in the present days. And he questioned, who are the migrants? Is it not the country of all people? Then why this kind of the term migration or migratory labor we are using? We find a number of issues that address the present pandemic situation. And it is clearly stated that this periodical is a digital edition. It's clearly stated in the cover page. So there is a shift from the printed edition to digital one. Though in digital publication, you should have to compose your matter. So it's printed, but in a different way. Here we find a number of issues have been addressed, namely the problem faced by our juvenile members of society, how they are facing problems in their daily life without a school, without going to school. They have to live in a 10 foot by 10 foot their own home. Are they happy or are they not? And some suggest that they are happy in a sense that they get relief from a number of assignments, namely dancing, singing, drawing, etc., etc. Later, they have to adopt the new technique of digital learning through online platform. They had to attend the online classes provided by their schools. And the education issue had been addressed by a number of publications, a number of periodicals in this time. We find a number of articles on this particular aspect, and the aspect of psychology, the aspect of the mind. We are saying that we should do something to uh, to what we can say, to please our mind. We have to do something for our mind. Uh, we can see the happenings after the lockdown. And here we can see a number of other issues beside the pending situation are present in the magazine. But some are constant, like the education, like the pandemic, like the self-reliance. Now, I am showing the contents of the last issue, which was published just yesterday. And here we find the development of a civil society. When we read the article written by Shati Bhattacharya, namely Kuri Takar Votes, there we find uh, the relief works which was initiated by different political groups, not political parties, but political social groups that had been converted. It was not free now. The laborer, the working class, they categorically stated that they would love to contribute a token price, either through their labor or money. And thus, now these kind of community kitchen have been transformed. It is not free nowadays, but the common people, the working class people, they are paying. And there is a difference between the beggar and the worker. This particular article is very important, and it clearly pointed out the difference between a beggar and a worker that should be noted in this pandemic situation. Let's move to another important aspect. I am showing, previously I am showing some magazines which has left leaning, but they are not the magazine of the leftist party. Somajivi Bhasha, Deshkal Bhavna obviously are left leaning, but they are saying that they are making a conversation between the democracy and the leftism. But here I am showing some magazines that are being published by the Communist Party of India Marxists. That is Nondon. Nondon published its digital edition in June 2020, entitled Puribesh, Corona, and Marx Prosango, Environment, Corona, and Marx. Here we find a number of articles. The first was on Corona pandemic and various things related to these Corona pandemics and the history of pandemics, etc., etc. and that was published by the Communist Party of India Marxist State Committee. Another important publication that is also published by Communist Party of India Marxist is Marx by the Court, and it published its special online issue, namely Pandemic. Just look at the slide. If a printed version is printed, there should not have this kind of contents, because the contents should have a visual effect. Just look at the slide. The number of pages have been clearly used as a visual. That's we find the globalization and pandemic an article written by Mukhopadhyay. We find COVID-19 lockdown and neoliberalism written by Ratan Khashnavish, and some other writings regarding the labor issue, regarding the cultivation issue, etc. And we find an article on the capital, environment, and the pandemic. We find an article on urbanization. Now, I think you have noticed that a number of articles have been published in various newspapers on the relationship between urbanization and pandemic. I remember an article published in The Statesman, and also the same article had been published in Anway, where a teacher of the Shipur in a college, IIST, had written on this aspect. Here we also find this aspect. So if we analyze the contents of these magazines, then we find it reflects the society, it reflects the contemporary days. That is one of the aims of Sahitya, one of the aims of literature also. It reflects our life. There's another instance of left who were in power for 34 years here. That's a mouthpiece of Democratic Youth Federation of India, Yuva Shakti, and it covers the virus of inequality. And here we find an interesting cover where the working women labor are coming to their home, and they are coming with their child in their shoulder or in their lap. That's a very interesting point. Now, I can remember when the IT first came up in Kolkata, I went to a bank, State Bank of India, Chattopadhyay University Bank. I find a poster which says, "Manusher hat jokhon bekar, jontro tokhon jontrona." That was the official line of the left in power at that time. But the present pandemic situation converted their viewpoints. Now they are using the digital platform. They are using IT. They are using IT during their own Politburo meetings. They are using digital platform for publication of their various mouthpieces in the various capacities. That's a major change, and that is a change which is evident in this pandemic situation. Now, I am showing the fortnightly edition of the Communist Party of India mouthpiece, Kalanto. That was published just yesterday, the last issue. Please notice, here it has been said, Kalanto blogspot. Kalanto এখন পিডিএফ সংস্করণ প্রকাশিত হচ্ছে। এবারে তা যাতে যে কেউ যে কোনো স্থান থেকে যখন খুশি নিজেরাই খুলে পড়ে নিতে পারেন, তার জন্য কালান্তর ব্লগস্পট খোলা হলো। এর ঠিকানা দেওয়া হয়েছে cpikalantor.blogspot.com। এইখানে ক্লিক করলেই খুলে যাবে কালান্তর। এখন আর আমাদের পাঠানোর জন্য অপেক্ষা করতে হবে না, বা ইমেইলে ঢুকে খুঁজে বার করতে হবে না। প্লিজ, it has to be noted, ছাপা কপি শুরু হবার পরেও এই ব্লগস্পট ব্যবস্থা বজায় থাকবে। So that is also a shift. Now, we are receiving a number of periodicals through our WhatsApp. The WhatsApp is a new development. We have received a number of periodicals, magazines as PDF. Now there is a shift from PDF to Blogspot, and a Communist Party of India owned magazine speaking of publishing Blogspot, and it is saying that they would publish it in Blogspot even after the pandemic, even when they would print their mouthpiece. That is very significant one, a significant change that took place in the print culture of our state, in the print culture of our time. That's the question arises, whether we are entering an age of ebooks. Here we are referring a YouTube presentation that has been uploaded by the publication division of the Shared Society. I've already mentioned that is the oldest publishing agency of India, and it presents an online panel discussion on printed books versus ebooks. And there we find 3 sessions. The first session where the senior professionals sharing their experiences on printed books and ebooks. There we can find the opinion of Shomik Bandyopadhyay, a noted publisher, editor, and art critic. We can hear the viewpoints of a particular publisher of Delhi. And if we listen to this YouTube piece, then we can find that they are saying that okay, ebooks are important, but ebooks are not the alternative to printed books. These are supplementary. I find another important, interesting publication that was published in the Statesman. The title of that publication was Evolving with Changing Times. And it says that the current pandemic has caused the publishing industry to survive and strengthen itself. It said the current pandemic has pushed everyone inwards, and with the people now staying more at home, the choice of entertainment is suddenly limited. And thanks to that, reading has acquired a premium space in everyone's mind. The days leading up to the nationwide lockdown in March saw a sharp rise in sale of books. Please note the sale of printed books, especially online. So the people, the readers, are buying books through online, but they are buying the printed books. That is very important. And here in this YouTube piece, we find views of library professionals on printed journals and online journals, and the opinion of young readers regarding their choice on printed books versus ebooks. So, what is ebooks? Ebooks is not the e-version of the printed one, but it is something different. It should have the link through which the reader can navigate from that particular book to other sites and other addresses. But that ebook has not come up in till date. Let's go to another important thing, that's Boyer Desh. It's a magazine on the review of books, and here we find the title Oshomoy, and that is also available in DBP Max app. Now, it should be noted that all of our major newspapers are available in online, but they are available in World Wide Web digital version. And this digital version has something different than that of this PDF version. And if we have to go through the archive of that particular newspapers, we find that the most strong archival version, the most strong archive of newspapers lies with Bonoshakti, the mouthpiece of the Communist Party of India Marxists. It's more stronger than ABP group, more stronger than Times group. So now the taboo against this technology, what we can say, the taboo has been erased, and it has been erased by the necessity. But there were online editions, but ultimately we need the printed book. That's why Desh published a big book comprising of the 5 issues, those were published during the time of lockdown, and they named this publication as Nirbhito Bashet Desh. It comprised the 5 issues, those were published during the time of lockdown. Thus, we need the digital version, along with we need the printed version that we can possess in our own hands, not in laptop, not in the mobile. So what is the purpose of a book? What is the purpose of literature? I find an advertisement. A book would be published on
Sorry to sir.
diaries of lockdown.
Hello sir. স্যার
Yes.
আপনার প্রেজেন্টেশন মোডটা ইয়ে হয়ে গেছে, পিপিইটা দেখা যাচ্ছে না। কেউ একজন ঢুকিয়ে মানে অন্য কেউ প্রেজেন্ট করে দিয়েছিলেন।
ও এত মুশকিল। ঠিক আছে, করছি। Is it visible now? Is it visible?
এখানে ক্লিক করো, ওই রিলেটেড পিপিটি ক্লিক করো।
পরিষ্কার ভিজিবল হচ্ছে না।
Is it visible now?
স্যার পরিষ্কার করে ভিজিবল হচ্ছে না।
Okay, I am connecting it once again. Okay.
Okay, sir.
I am connecting it once again. I am taking much more time.
No, sir, it's okay.
Okay.
স্যার স্ক্রিনটা আরেকবার শেয়ার করুন, হয়ে যাবে। স্ক্রিনটা একবার শেয়ার করুন।
Can you see the screen now? Is it okay? I have shared the screen. Is it visible?
হ্যাঁ এইবারে ঠিক আছে। হ্যাঁ স্যার পাচ্ছি স্যার।
হ্যাঁ স্যার
Now,
ঠিক আছে।
I am showing the slide that a lockdown diary would be published in August, where a number of people would ventilate their feelings during the lockdown days, and that will be published in a book form. It will be published by Book Boiwala, and it is priced as ₹2050, ₹350. Sorry. Thus, we find that we need book. Along with digital version, we need book. So that is the alternate, not the alternative, but a complementary one. Now, we would like to possess the book. That is a major issue. We should have to collect the book. That's why it is saying that it's a collector's item. So our aim is not to read the text, not to read through the online platform, not to read in a digital form. We want to possess an item which should be treated as collector's item. And here I would like to mention a debate that took place during the time of lockdown. I think some of you must know the debate. A pre-booking was offered for a book, namely Nunte Fonte Shonaya Sohaga, on the occasion of the 50-year celebration of the first publication of the famous comics Nunte Fonte, penned by Narayan Deppt. And it was over-advertised. Pre-booking was started. Dept was the publisher, and pre-booking was started by an online supply agency. And it was promised that in each and every book, the author or the person who creates Nunte Fonte would sign on his own. There would be an autograph of his own, and that would be a collector's item. But when, during lockdown period, the book was published, that is the book with the person who creates Nunte Fonte, it was clearly stated that it's a collector's item, Bishesh Sangrahak Sankha. The problem arises. It was stated by the recipients, by the persons who booked earlier, before publication of the book, that the autograph is not the original one. It's a facsimile. Thus, they had been cheated by the publication house. So, what is important that this book has a long introduction along with the comics which had already been published. So, many of them already had the comics that was published previously. But what was important in this publication was the autograph of Narayan Deppt, a person who crossed 90 years of age. But the persons who bought the book, they said that they were cheated by the publishers because they received the book, but they did not receive the original autograph of Narayan Deppt. It was facsimile. That's a huge debate. And that brings us the importance of collector's item. So to us, the books are collector's item. Not only we collect book for reading, but we love to possess the book. I have the whole collection of Rabindranath Tagore, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, but how many of us read all the articles? Nowadays, if I need a particular piece of Rabindranath, it's easier for me to have it in online platform, in internet. I seldom use the printed version, but I possess the whole thing. Rabindra Rachanaburi I have. That is a major point. So our print culture is important in a sense that it should provide the collector of books, the books in a printed form, the book in a so-called within quote book form. Now let's move on the contents of literature. I find the first story written on the present context of Amphan during the time of pandemic, during the time of lockdown. It was published in Anandabajar Potrik Ravivarsariyo on 19 July 2020. That is just 14 days ago. And that short story was on the promise that was not kept by a person, a powerful person. So it has a class question, I can say, but the context is very important. The context was of lockdown. The context was of Amphan. Thus, we can say that the literature reflects the life of contemporary days. Here, I find a short story, first of its kind, which addresses the present situation. Previously, I started my presentation with the publication mainly in the periodicals, and that were mainly the articles or the papers, not the story or the creative literature. Here we find the emergence of creative literature, and I think there will be a much more to come in the future days, contextualizing this COVID. And here I have said that here is a mixture of the Amphan and pandemic caused by COVID. Here we can see a picture caught between COVID-19 and Amphan miseries. That's important. The picture is there and the short story was in the previous slide. Now, this is the Facebook post of today. It has been posted by a noted writer, noted author Vinod Ghoshal. He has said in today's Facebook post, in today's post, today morning I saw the post in the Boipoka portal, in the Boipoka group, Facebook group. But he has said, ঐতিহ্যের সঙ্গে নতুনের জলযাত্রা ইতোমধ্যেই আমার কে বাজায় বাঁশির প্রথম পর্ব সহ বেশ কিছু বই প্রিন্ট ভার্সনের পাশাপাশি ইবুক ফর্মেও এসে গেছে। আজ দেব সাহিত্যকুটির থেকে প্রকাশিত এই বইটির ইবুক ভার্সন লঞ্চ করেছে। প্লিজ নোটিস দ্য লাইন, আজ দেব সাহিত্যকুটির থেকে প্রকাশিত এই বইটির ইবুক ভার্সন লঞ্চ করেছে। প্রকাশক কিছুক্ষণ আগে জানালেন বইটি ইতিমধ্যে বিক্রিও শুরু হয়ে গেছে। হ্যাঁ, সংখ্যায় অবশ্যই কম, কিন্তু নতুনের পদধ্বনি শোনা যাচ্ছে, তাকে স্বাগত। ঐতিহ্যের পাশাপাশি নবীনও তার জায়গা নেই। সো there is a change, a shift in the print culture, a shift in our life, a shift in the physical distancing. We are now maintaining social distancing. We are not staying at home. We are saying that stay home, stay safe. We are under lockdown. And now we have to face the problem. We are fanatic. There is a problem, and this picture, this is not painted by Isha Muhammad, a famous artist. Name, the caption is Atunko. Now we have to live with this Atunko, and we have to overcome this kind of situation. The only constant in life is change, as Heraclitus once said. So we have to overcome this pandemic situation through this creativity, and our literature would help us to combat this problem. So we should think with literature, we should think with print culture. There are changes which I have in my presentation, and I think that is very important because this is a changing society. Now I would like to thank you for being with me for a long time during the presentation, but I would not like to thank you only. I am also thanking our doctors, our nurses, health workers, sweepers, police for protecting us from COVID-19. Thank you all. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was really an interesting, insightful, and enriching presentation. You through your presentation, try to show the paradigm shift in printing culture, how, like us, it also went through an isolation, and how this digital print culture were affected by the pandemic. Not only the medium, when you showed us the slides of Bengali literary magazine, you actually showed that how the contents were also affected by the pandemic. In one part of your presentation, you said that physical distance is replaced by literature. I find it really amazing because in this lockdown situation, it is through digital print culture where we are getting the essence of reading a book, because literature connects us with life, with society. But there a question remains, like you said, like can this digitalized PDF version can be called that asset for a book lover? Like, can we call it that when I have a downloaded PDF version that it's an asset for me? So this question will always, be there. But I can see the participants are also like mesmerized to your presentation. I have our principal sir has conveyed a message to you, so I will read it to you. Tons and millions of thanks and congratulations for accepting our invitation to deliver your excellent speech on today's digital platform. However, you are looking like a genuine historical figure. He says that he means it, and he addresses you as brother and wishes you safety and blessed. So this is a message from our principal, sir. Now I have a few more questions from you for you, sir. One question is from Dr. Dept Chatterjee, Syamsundar College. She asks, the question I'm saying, is the new normal of print culture in this COVID-19 situation going to be the dominant one, especially when this crisis is over? And second question, how much is this new normal going to affect the print culture in its literal sense, that is, publishing hard copies in future?
May I respond now?
Yes, sir. You can.
May I respond now?
Yes, sir.
Or I can take all the questions unitedly, then I respond in a united way. Okay. I think other question should come up to me, and I would respond as a whole.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
So the next question from Tanmoy De, he asks, will this pandemic situation move our habit of writing, reading, and publishing on online platform more than before? Second question he asks, can the online publishing be sufficient to replace offline publishing until the situation turned into normal one? These are the four questions.
Is there any other question?
No, sir.
Okay. I would like to respond. This is not an answer, but I would like to respond to the queries, and which I think justifies my presentation. If there is no query, then there is no justification of any presentation. Now, I think I have already mentioned that the digital platform is a complementary or supplementary to the earlier print version. And that is evident by the publication of the Desh magazine's new issue on the title Nirvito Bashe, that comprising of the 5 issues that were published during lockdown period. So the ABP group is of the opinion that there are buyers who would love to possess the print version, though they had been read in the digital way. So my response is that we get the copy of any book not for reading only, but also for possessing. Online publishing will not be sufficient to replace the offline publication. I don't think it is sufficient, but it is very important. Without online publication, we could not have the access to a number of periodicals. I don't subscribe a number of periodicals which I have showed in my PowerPoint presentation. That I received those magazines through PDF in my WhatsApp or in my emails. So without these access, I can't read those magazines. So I think online is there to stay with us, but not it erases the necessity of the offline one. Tonmoy has said that can the online publishing will be sufficient to replace? Don't think so. It would not be replaced by the digital platform, but there should be digital platform. And nowadays, as I read out the Facebook post of Vinod Ghoshal, who said that his book has been published in both platforms, in digital form and in print form. And nowadays we have the both platforms. Just I would like to mention the Times Road newspaper, এই সময় is printed newspaper, all of us know. It has an online version. Nowadays, during the lockdown period, they initiated a podcast version. That is, someone is reading out the pieces which had been published in that particular newspaper. Can you believe? So that there are three versions. One is the printed version, which we have in our hand. Another is the digital version, which we have in our laptop or smartphone. And the third version is the podcast version, which we can hear through our headphones. So the time is changing. I have already mentioned that the only constant in life is change. So we are changing. Our print culture is changing. Our life is changing. We are going towards a new normal. And this new normal is evident in our reading habit, in our writing habit. A publisher has opined that a number of manuscripts has come through this lockdown period. So the authors are writing on different aspects, on their own expertise, on the creative writings. A number of things are coming up. And they will be published in both ways, in digital ways, along with in the printed ways. That is my humble submission. Thank you. Okay, over to Priyanka.
Priyanka, do unmute yourself.
Sorry. Thank you, sir. Okay, sir. Now we move on. Thank you, everyone. Now we move on to the last part of our program, and I would like to request Professor Jagannath Hati for vote of thanks. Over to you, Jagannath, sir. Jagannath, sir, are you there?
Okay, just give me some time. I'll check.
Principal sir, if you have to say something, you can say.
I think you can carry on. You can carry on. Jagannath is, I think he is not here. I suppose it.
I just had a talk with him. He'll be there soon.
Is he coming?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, sir.
Fine. Okay, fine.
Am I audible? Supriti?
Yes, sir, you are audible and visible.
Yes, sir. Please continue. Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of organizing committee of the webinar, it is indeed a great pleasure for me to give the vote of thanks to all the respected invited speakers, academicians, dignitaries in this prestigious dais. I like to congratulate our invited speakers, both of Dr. Anway Mukhopadhyay and Professor Dr. Sabyasachi Chattopadhyay. We know a record of actions makes history, and history is a legacy. Department of English is a legacy and a tradition of our pioneers. With a view to supplying appropriately enriched manpower, Department of English of Syamsundar College was established at the beginning of our college, and during the last 60 years, the department has tried to achieve this objective successfully. I am thankful to the authority of Sarat Centenary College and this webinar entitled Towards New Normal, Pandemic and Migration in Literary Context, organized by the Department of English of Syamsundar College in collaboration with the Department of English, Sarat Centenary College. We are proud to have our distinguished scholars, academicians in the fields of literature and history from various leading institutions of our state. Among us in the webinar, Professor Dr. Anway Mukhopadhyay, Professor, Assistant Professor of Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Kharagpur, and Professor Dr. Sabyasachi Chattopadhyay, Associate Professor of Department of History, Kalyani University. I must acknowledge very proudly the contribution and valuable lectures of both the invited speakers. Dr. Mukhopadhyay has delivered an excellent lecture on literature in times of crisis, challenges to the ethos of Sahitya begin with. Dr. Mukhopadhyay has brilliantly addressed the role and relevance of literature in the times of crisis. Thank you very much, sir, for your valuable contribution. Dr. Sabyasachi Chattopadhyay, Associate Professor of Department of History, Kalyani University, has delivered a lecture on Contextualizing COVID, Portraying the Post-COVID Print Culture. Dr. Chattopadhyay has nicely given us a roadmap to tackle with the post-COVID and new normal situation in the context of print culture. Thank you very much, sir, for your resourceful lecture. We are grateful to our Honorable Principal, sir, Dr. Gauri Shankar Bandyopadhyay, without whose continuous inspiration and valuable advice, this webinar could not be organized at all. I would like to thank and take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to Honorable Principal of Sarat Centenary College, Dr. Sandeep Kumar Bosak, for giving his consent for collaboration of this webinar. We are highly indebted to the college authority and our colleagues associated with the college administration for their active cooperation and help in organizing this type of webinar. We also thankful to our conveners, Professor Supriti Devnath, Assistant Professor of Department of English of Syamsundar College, and Dr. Ramanuj Konar, Assistant Professor of Department of English of Sarat Centenary College, Dhoniakali, Hooghly. Special credit goes to our organizing secretary, Dr. Devopriya Banerjee, Assistant Professor of Department of English of Syamsundar College. We are thankful to our two moderators. First, Dr. Devopriya Banerjee, and second, Dr. Professor Priyanka Mollik, Assistant Professor of Department of English of Syamsundar College. I must acknowledge the contribution of other faculty members of the Department of English of Syamsundar College, namely Professor Chiranjit Ghosh, Parindita Laik, Tarimaja Samanto, and Sangita Bhattacharya, state-aided college teachers of Department of English of Syamsundar College. I must congratulate all the esteemed colleagues, both teaching and non-teaching, of both day and morning section of our college, as well as all teaching and non-teaching staff and beloved students of both the college, Syamsundar College and Sarat Centenary College. I must congratulate to all the well-wishers within and outside our college, including the friends in the print media, which make our teamwork complete. So success, if any, may kindly be attributed to all of them. To conclude, I personally and as Secretary of Teachers Council, Syamsundar College, would like to thank with sincere respect and gratitude to all our respected invited speakers, distinguished participants, esteemed colleagues, and beloved students. Wishing you all a safe and healthy future. Thank you once again very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Jagannath sir. Now, if Dr. Chattopadhyay has anything to convey, please do, sir. We'll be happy to have it.
I would just like to take 2 minutes from you. Now, literature means to being with, that is Sahitya. Now, I would like to say a poem written by Nirendra Chakraborty. Name of the poem is Thaka Mane. Thaka Mane কিছু বই, থাকা মানে লেখার টেবিল, থাকা মানে আকাশের নীল, পুকুরে পড়েছে রোদ, গাছের সবুজ, ছাদের কার্নিশে দুটি পাখি, জলের ভিতর কিছু চোরা টান, সায়ংকালীন স্তব্ধতার মধ্যে ধীরে ধীরে একা নৌকাটির প্রবে বৃষ্টির আড়ালে চলে যাওয়া, খাদ্যের গুমট ভেঙে বৃষ্টির খবর নিয়ে ছুটে আসে হাওয়া, যা এসে বুকের মধ্যে লাগে। থাকা মানে মানুষের মুখ, ঘাম, ক্লান্তি ও বিষাদ, জানিয়ে সংসার তার সবই। থাকা মানে দুঃখে সুখে সংরাগে বিরাগে সবকিছুকে হাতের মুঠোয় ধরে রাখা। থাকা মানে আলোতে কালোতে আঁকা ছবি, যে ছবি তাৎপর্যে ভরা অথচ সম্পূর্ণ অর্থহীন। থাকা মানে তারই মধ্যে বেঁচে পড়তে থাকা। ধন্যবাদ সকলকে। থ্যাংকস টু অল।
Thank you, Dr. Chattopadhyay, for such a cordial gesture from you. Now, I think we should end this webinar. Dr. Konar? Hello?
I think he has left.
Okay. Now, Principal Sir, shall we end it? Okay, he has left also. So I think we shall leave because we are already done with this webinar. Thank you all, dear participants. Thank you, the speakers.
That has come. I think.
Okay. Okay. Principal Sir?
Do you have any feedback form for the certificates?
Yes, there's
Principal Sir left only.
Hello, Principal Sir?
Principal Sir had left only. He's here, yes.
Sir, we are done.
No. Principal Sir.
Shall we end it?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Dr. Konar, hello?
Yes, I got disconnected. Sorry for this. So I'm back again.
We are done with it.
Sorry for this.
Yeah. It's absolutely fine. So we have ended with a beautiful recital by Dr. Chattopadhyay. Now, shall we end this webinar?
Yeah. You can end this. After you declare it is over, I will stop the recording.
Okay, it's over. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.